Thank you for tuning in. Today is March 13th, 2025. My name's Tim, the BTWN guy. I'm going to play some clips from a podcast. If you just want to listen to the podcast, you don't want to listen to me, I understand. The link to the podcast is the first thing listed in the description of this video. That podcast is about an hour long. You can go listen to the whole thing, or you can hang around here. I'm going to play some short clips from Pastor John that I believe are insightful, that'll help us as we pray for him. This podcast was recorded February 18th. And in that, Pastor John gives his own account of his health. And this was the video I released a couple days ago. This was a video that Pastor John made for the Shepherds Conference. This video that we showed a couple days ago is after the audio that was recorded that I'm going to play for you today, where Pastor John talks about his health condition. Now, the podcast that I'm talking about is on the Expositor. It's part of Pastor John's podcast called the MacArthur Center podcast. So it's part of the MacArthur Center. And the podcast is awesome. Not only does John give some insightful things about his health, but he talks about his age. And now the podcast itself, well, let me back up. Stay tuned for the end. The end, I'm going to share with you some good news from today. But then I also want to share with you the audio from this podcast because it's extremely insightful to how Pastor John is actually doing, where he didn't say these things in the Shepherds Conference video. So this was recorded February 18th. It was released. This podcast is episode 8, and it was released on March 4th. And the name of the podcast is The Grace of Technology. It's called that because, the way the podcast is structured, it's structured so that it talks about how it's amazing that Pastor John is alive today, and a big part of that is because of technology. And then on the other hand, it's amazing that Pastor John's ministry is so big, and it's so big because of technology. And both of these things are available because God in his providence has made them available to us. So that is kind of the foundation of this whole thing. And with that set up, again, stay tuned to the end, okay? Because there's an update from today on X.
Somebody asked me the other day about my physical condition. And I said, the truth is, I went 85 years and then went off a cliff. I had the need for surgery on my veins to keep me alive. I had surgery on my lungs to keep me alive. I had a replacement, this is amazing, of the aortic valve with a procedure called TAVR to keep me alive.
That procedure.
So that all those things if you've been listening to everything, we kind of knew all that. But then the host of the podcast says that TAVR tech is amazing, and then they actually go and hear from Pastor John's doctor about that amazing technology that is part of the reason why Pastor John's
called
alive.
TAVR is extraordinary.
And now Pastor John continues.
So literally, I'm now kept alive by stints, by I think it's a cow valve, lung surgery, and one more. This will be new to people. My kidneys have essentially come down to the final stage. So over the last 2 months, I've been in a long, elongated hospital setting, and I've come out of that, and entered into the world of dialysis. It keeps me alive. Literally, dialysis, I can sit in a chair and watch my blood go out and spin through this machine that does what a kidney does. Kidneys are this big, and the machine is 2 feet wide and 3 feet high to replicate that. But anyway, I have to do that 3 times a week, and it takes 4 hours.
Wow, that's heavy. So I don't know about you, but if I was 85 years old going through that, I would not be recording podcasts. I would not be meeting with elders in my home. I would not be looking to teach. Man, I'm impressed. I am super impressed. I know you are. I know you love Pastor John as well as I do. So this recording was at Pastor John's home. I didn't say that in the beginning, but it was at Pastor John's home by his fireplace. And this was in the beginning of the podcast. These 2 clips I just played were in the beginning of the podcast. And the podcast goes on. Again, stay tuned to the end. There's something encouraging. And then I've got 2 more clips to play for you. But, Pastor John is not the Apostle Paul. He's not. But when you read Paul's writings, when you know that the last book that he wrote and the last few paragraphs that he wrote, you sit up and you listen more intently than you ever did. And how much longer does Pastor John have? I don't know. I don't want to speculate at all, but it's towards the end, right? So I think we should sit up and listen intently because he's a very wise man. And God continues to use his words in my life and in your life. So we will continue. But before I get to the last few comments from Pastor John, the podcast itself talks about the technology and how today's internet and technology, how things went from people passing around audio tapes to downloads. And now, amazingly, the number one outlet, according to the podcast, the number one outlet for John MacArthur content is YouTube. There's a lot of crappy, I use the word, that word. There's a lot of bad stuff on YouTube. There's a lot of good stuff too. And God has used technology and the platform of YouTube. And even like right now, the podcast said that there are people in rural farms in India who live in mud huts who have cell phone-like devices, if not cell phones, who are able to listen to and be ministered to by Pastor John. All right, so towards the end of the podcast, Pastor John is talking about his body and how his body's doing and how his body is a tool.
I can't live without it. I understand that the Lord gave me a good tool in my body. It's been through a lot. It's been a lot of places, done a lot of things. It's carried me in and out of virtually every part of the world. It served me well to provide a voice for preaching and teaching. God used it in my marriage to produce 4 wonderfully godly children, and out of that came grandchildren and great-grandchildren. But I also understand that the body is temporary, and I'm okay with that. Isn't that what Paul says? I'm at the point where I'm running out of the capability of this body, and I long for my body, which is from above. But I want to make sure I wring everything that this body can do. So I'm going through every procedure I can as one thing fails, another thing fails. But this is that time in your life when things are going to fail. 85 years old. I feel good. I don't have any pain. I don't have any sickness. And up to this point, every one of those issues has been remedied by technology.
And Pastor John goes on. I've got one more clip to play for you, but Pastor John goes on to talk about how amazing creation is, and that man doesn't create technology. Man discovers technology that is part of creation, and just how amazing God's creation is through his sovereignty and through his wonderful creation. All of this technology is buried in the creation. So even in the midst of him talking, and he's teaching, and for more of that, of course, listen to the whole podcast. Link in the description of this video. All right, so closing comments as they're wrapping up the conversation. Pastor John talks about more on this topic. Listen to this.
I accept this from him as a gift. I'm trying to make the most of it, make the best use of it. In the process of keeping my body in the place where it could serve me, I've had to go through a lot of procedures. That's taken me down pretty low, down to 7 weeks in the hospital. You don't want to be there 7 weeks. You don't want to be there 1 week. I'm told, but for every week you're in the hospital, you lose 2 to 3 weeks of strength and capacity. And I'm finding that true. I'm out of the hospital. I feel great. But I'm going to be months trying to rehab from that. Weeks in the hospital turns into months of rehabilitation. I'm willing to do that because I don't think God is through with me yet.
Wow. I'm willing to go through all of this. He says many procedures that have taken him to pretty low. He says that have taken me down pretty low. Amazing. Like I said, I would be home alone. I would not be entertaining or looking to minister to others. But Pastor John, he says he's willing to go through all this because he doesn't think that God is through with him yet. So sobering insights from this podcast into how Pastor John's health is. Lots of detail there, a lot of transparency. It's crazy. Some people say that Grace Community Church isn't transparent. Well, yeah, all you got to do is listen, and you'll hear it. So here's the good news. This is from today. All right. Again, the timeline is this interview, this content I just shared with you, that was shared on March 4th, a recording from February 18th. And then the Shepherd's Conference video came out. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just go into my video library, just 2 videos back, where Pastor John said that he was on his last lap. So here's Phil Johnson today on X saying, I spent another hour with John MacArthur again this morning. Though he obviously is nowhere near full strength, I think he's improving, albeit slowly. He's making plans to come and record for Grace to You in the studio next week. He's motivated and galvanized. And Phil comments on his own tweet saying, and again, I think he is showing good signs of improvement. Here's hoping, quote unquote, the final lap for him will be at least a decade long. So there you have it, folks. You can pray for Pastor John. You can pray specifically for Pastor John because you know what he's going on. He's going through dialysis 3 times a week for 4 hours at a time, and all this recovery and all this rehab because he's not convinced that God is finished with him yet. What are we doing for the Lord? A lot of talk about our bodies in that podcast. And look, I'm much younger. I'm sure you're probably younger. I know a lot of my audience is my age and a little bit older, but we're capable. And let's take Pastor John's example and consider, using our bodies to serve the Lord. Even Pastor John, in the midst of all that he's going through, is thinking about how he can use his body for the Lord. So we're a lot healthier. Let's be continuing looking for opportunities to serve the Lord, to serve others, and to bring honor and glory to our Savior, Jesus Christ. I look forward to your comments. I'm sure you'll be praying, and stay tuned. Subscribe if you haven't already. Till my next video, my prayer is that God would bless each and every one of you. Take care. See you.